Welcome to Delenta Activate, the podcast that brings you insights and stories from executive coaches and changemakers in the leadership space. I'm your host, Dr. Naeema Pasha from Delenta, and I'm excited to share with you the latest trends, best practices, and innovations in coaching and leadership development. In this podcast, you'll hear from experts who successfully coach leaders and teams to achieve their goals and overcome challenges and transform their organizations. Whether you're a coach, a leader, or someone who wants to grow personally and professionally, this is the podcast for you. So tune in, get inspired, and activate your potential with Delenta Activate. Hi there, and welcome to an episode of Delenta Activate. And today I'm so happy to have an amazing person join the podcast, Jenny Garrett OBE. And I'm especially excited to meet Jenny because many of you will know that I work in this field of combining things of skills, coaching, working in race equity and future work in AI. And it's very rare. And people often ask, so how can you combine all these things into one? Well, Jenny has done that and combined this sort of thinking around equity, diversity, skills, talent, and coaching into one, and been awarded an OBE for her work in this area. So I'm kind of like, gosh, I'm finally meeting somebody who's even more amazing and brilliant, or who's incredibly amazing and brilliant in this area. So I'm really delighted to welcome Jenny Garrett OBE to Delenta Activate podcast today. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you, Naeema. And really, really happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I really want to talk to you about a whole bunch of things. I'm like, where do I start? What do I do? But you've got a book, a practical empowering book, as you call it, Equality versus Equity, particularly looking at race in the workplace. And when I was at Henley Business School, published, we did a great piece of research which headed up called Equity. And we had to do a lot of discussion about equity versus equality around race equity is what we were particularly looking at. So I'm going to go, because there's so much to talk about, I want to go straight into that. Would you mind telling us about your amazing book and a little bit about the inspiration for you to write it?
Thank you so much. And I think I actually quote that Henley research in my book. So it's a circular thing happening here. Yeah, it's really interesting that equity was a part of talks that I delivered, a kind of small part, really, of talks I was delivering around diversity and inclusion, and just helping to educate people to understand that actually giving everyone the same thing won't change anything. You know, this idea of if I'm fair, if I'm a line manager and I'm being fair and I treat all of my staff the same, then that's enough. And I really wanted to sort of drive home that message that actually it's not. We don't treat people the same and expect them to achieve different things. So, you know, if we give the example of the seesaw that I have in my book, I talk about the fact that if you go on a seesaw, one person's heavier and one person's lighter, one person's at quite a disadvantage. If we give them both additional weight, the disadvantage is still there. And I sort of was driving home that message in talks that I delivered. And amazingly, on one of those talks was a commissioning editor of Emerald Publishing. And she said, excuse me, she said, oh, that's a really interesting topic. Maybe you might want to write a book about it. And at the time I thought, have I got enough to say on this topic? And as I started exploring it, I started delving into my own personal experience, really, you know, the disadvantages that I have experienced as a woman and as a Black woman, the difficulties I've experienced in the workplace, microaggressions, bias, stereotypes. And I thought, yeah, this actually is a book that's important to write, specifically for managers, to help them understand a very different lived experience. You know, in the book, I share one example of where I was invited to an event. I was at the gala dinner. So I was pretty dressed up at this gala dinner, joined a table. And, one of the gentlemen, first of all, asked me if I was catering staff. And then proceeded to ask me where I went on holiday. And when I said, I'm a person who wants to travel the world, I love going to different places. He said, well, I thought you might want to go back home and stay there. Now, this is in a professional setting. I was dressed up, I'm not on the street with a group of strangers, or it was just so horrible and uncomfortable. And the fact that I had to experience that and then also see the other people around me squirm, but not speak up, sort of being embarrassed in their seat, maybe try and change the subject, but not really intervene and say, actually, this is not okay. When I started to draw on experiences like that I've had, it just made me remember that this is a really important topic to discuss. And just another example I've got of actually being in the workplace where I was in a small team, and the manager decided to ask everyone else in the team one by one, as each person declined because they had something else to do, to attend an event, and then chose not to ask me. It wasn't going to be
Oh,
me, or I
well,
wasn't going to be right for the event.
oh
These
my
sorts of things.
gosh.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. First of all, I didn't mean to react so visibly, but there I am reacting. I'm so sorry. If somebody is, incredible and talented and has achieved so much to have that experience. And I wanted to echo that back with my own experience after I did the race, the equity effect, which went everywhere. It was picked up by the Bank of England, shaped some of their policy, and spoken about in national newspaper media. I was asked to speak at a massive keynote event for Microsoft. It was huge, almost, 1,000 people there in person and thousands online, and I wasn't allowed in by the security. Security stopped me going in to
Wow.
speak at the event, that with my picture all over and another a lady who was white said, "I'll take you in," and when I went in with her, I wasn't questioned. So there was just that personal example. I can relate back how the feeling of shame and awkwardness and feeling angry, all those things coming in. But I wanted to just pick up with the equity effect research that we found in that research, that the people who are most discriminated, and this is especially why I'm so in awe that you wrote this, are Black women in the workplace. So we've got the intersection of women, Black women in the workplace, and particularly as they grow up through their career when they're coming up to more senior roles, are the most discriminated. And exactly as you said in your last example, bypassed for what when we looked into it, bypassed for things, projects, for example, promote, things that would enable. So I just thought, let's just discuss let's discuss, if you would tell me, when we know this is repeated because it's obviously in the data, what is the impact, do you think, on people, and then also the organization with this?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we know that intersectional identities, it's a compound effect. It's not just being a woman and being a woman of color. It's, that would say two things. Actually, it's this compound effect that happens. And Kimberly Crenshaw, the scholar who came up with this idea, talks about that. And she talks about the fact that as a result, we fall through the cracks. People don't see the discrimination that we're experiencing. But I think I'd like to just draw on an example from a coaching client I've had, actually, who she was working very hard for an organization. She was promoted, but her role wasn't backfilled. And she was also supposed to have a couple of team members. They never materialized. So ultimately, she was really doing the work of 4 people. But she was getting on with it because actually, the idea, work hard, someone will notice, and you'll be recognized for all of that. She'd spoken to her line manager and asked, what can I do to be in the position to get the director role when it comes up? You're doing all the right things, said the line manager. It went to the panel, and she wasn't given the role. What she was given was coaching. Now, through coaching, and at that point, she was saying, number 1, morale low. Number 2, actually physical well-being really low. Thirdly, maybe I just need to go backwards in my career. I've been here a long time, but maybe I'm just not good enough. And I think what happens, particularly for women of color, is that we keep our head down, we work hard quite often, and we think that we will be recognized for our hard work. And ultimately, we become more and more unhappy because we are not being discovered. What we found in the end was this woman's line manager was keeping her exactly where she was because she was working so hard. And he would have to replace her with 4 people. And ultimately, I helped her to network into a new role in the organization into a more senior role. But even at that point, they tried not to give her the correct salary. And we had to actually go into their ethnicity pay gap data to ensure that she got the salary she deserved. Now, with all of this, so much is happening because when other people around you are questioning you, you start to question yourself. And there's something that happens called maladaptive perfectionism that occurs with women of color. We think we have to be perfect 100% of the time in every single way. We have to be bulletproof. And what we all know is that none of us are perfect, are we? So we're putting ourselves to such high standards that we cannot maintain, and that has a detrimental impact on us. I also think something that occurs for us is a self-silencing. So if every time I speak up, I'm aggressive, I'm arrogant, I'm too assertive, or I'm wrong, or I'm being spoken over, I start to silence myself. And what happens because of that is the organization doesn't think I have anything to contribute. They don't recognize their contribution to the fact that I'm now self-silencing. Plus all of the other things that can happen, the judgments. Oh, you're a Black woman, you must be a single parent. Oh, you probably have been educated in this place, not that place. Oh, I'm surprised to know where you live. All of these sort of judgments that are happening on the daily basis eat away at us. And as a result, we don't get to give our very best in the workplace. We may have to cover parts of our own identity to fit in order to think that we can navigate the workplace. But even then, when we don't show up authentically, I think that then we're not trusted in the organization anyway. So it still backfires for us. So we use a lot of energy trying to navigate the workplace instead of just showing up as our best selves and being able to contribute in the very best way. And that's because of these environments that are not truly inclusive.
That's so powerful, Jenny. I kind of think I wish I'd met a Jenny earlier in my career to sort of shape these, because that's exactly my story, and it will be exactly thousands and millions of other people's stories as well. So you encapsulate it perfectly, and kind of the people listening into this will probably have that sense of, like I am, of kind of like, oh my God, this sort of deep intake. And I remember, if I may, when I started working in the space of EDI, which isn't that long ago, and I remember saying to my manager, I don't really want to work in this space. I've avoided it. I really have. I've avoided it, as many of us do, because we want our identity to be identified as marketeers or research scientists or doctors or waiters or whatever we're doing, in our own field or whatever we've decided to develop. So I was avoiding, and I said, I want to just do my work on AI, robots and careers and skills kind of, but I felt I had to do it. And it was partly pushed into it, and I'll just give you my own story. I was partly pushed into it because I wanted to do a discussion around race, because I saw this particularly, aspects of racism and discrimination, and working in how that would impact young people. And lots of data was coming through about differences in people's performance and awarding of first-class degrees from white students compared to Black students, for example, double, by the way. So I thought I would just start a conversation. So we had what is now quite common. It's just about 4 or 5 years ago, about doing something called Courageous Conversations. I want to just share this with you because I wanted to ask you how you got into this. So I thought that would be an interesting and non-combative kind of thing to do, because I didn't really want to go into combative field. I wanted to do all this other stuff. And previously, a couple of years earlier, we started looking at discrimination as well. But the reaction I got, eventually it came up. Eventually there was a complaint put to my manager, to the dean, about that I was doing racism by running things around discussing race against white, the white majority. So, and that made me really upset and really I can still feel it now in me, how I felt about that. But it also made me think, gosh, there's such a gap in this, sort of, there's a gulf, I should say, about what we need to do to enable, as you say, kind of about the equity thing, for us all to be on a fair level playing field, for us to all to perform and contribute to our organizations, the world, society, whatever we're doing. Is there something that made you want to go into this? I share that story just for the podcast, but also to hear your story about how you came into this.
I think there were a number of things. I definitely want to start by saying the idea absolutely resonates with me, which is I don't want to be put in a box. I don't have to do gender because I'm a woman. I don't have to do race because I'm a Black woman. And I resisted it for quite some time. It was just leadership. I'm focused on leadership.
Yes.
But then I wrote a previous book to the one I've written about 11 years ago now, probably, called Rocking Your Role. And it was a guide to success for female breadwinners. And that's a topic that we don't talk about very much, women who are the main earner in their home. So I think there's something for me that I end up talking about the stuff that people don't really want to talk about. And end up
But we
writing
need you. As long as you've got an army of people cheering you, hopefully you'll be employed to do these.
But that book led me to do lots of talks in organizations, in the way you're describing your research paper enabled you to talk to lots of people. And when I would look out on these audiences, what I found was it was typically middle class white women I was speaking to. Now, I absolutely wanted to support them in their journey as a main earner in their home. But I thought, where are the people who look like me? Why are they not in these rooms? And I was creating women's leadership programs. And again, there was very few women of color on these leadership programs. So it was a trigger point for me in which I said, you know what, I need to talk to the women who look like me. I need to help them navigate the workplace and their life as main earners. And actually, often women of color are more likely to be the main earner. So I wanted to do something about it. And so it was at that point that I said, I'm actually going to just start really talking about my own lived experience more. I'm going to talk to organizations about the fact that actually why isn't there better representation in the rooms in which I'm speaking, and offer to support through leadership development, specifically in terms of helping those from the global majority or ethnically diverse backgrounds, helping them break through the glass ceilings. So it was a sort of one day just looking out on these audiences and thinking, what on earth is going on here? Why is there no one who looks like me reflected back in my audience? There's something wrong and I need to do something about it.
Well, I'm so pleased you did, and all power to you moving forward. In fact, I was going to ask you, this is just to give, so when I did the equity effect, I got a lot of, it was I have to say, it's probably the most difficult thing I've done, not from doing the research and pulling that out, that was very empowering, and I feel really proud of the work that we did in Henley to do that, and leading that was a real privilege. But it was hard because of the reactions, and when we started putting out social media, I had some quite bad experiences there. Had to put forward complaints for account, and then action was taken against certain accounts that popped up. So how do we, this is something I really think for all people listening and for working in this space, whether they're allies or have a lived experience, what is your advice, particularly as a coach? What is your advice? How do we keep ourselves sane, strong, and I'm wary to go resilient because that makes you feel like, oh, I've got to go this, but always joyful? How can we stay happy and do this work? Let me ask you that.
I think it's a great question. And I definitely see people working in this space burnt out, and I think the burnout is two-way. It's from how much you give, but it's also from how much you absorb. Because you're working in this space, people are telling you their stories, their experience, and of course you are empathetic, and so you take some of that in. So I think it's two-way. For me, I have a lot of practices, I think, as a coach, which are about well-being generally. I think getting out into nature really helps. It just helps you just put everything into perspective. The physicality of absorbing some fresh air and moving your body and all of that sort of thing. So I think there are general well-being practices like walking in nature, like journaling. There's a wonderful theory called positive intelligence, which is all about mindfulness activities, tiny mindful activities that can help you process information you're receiving and get back to yourself. Little things like just feeling the ridges on your fingers, just doing that for a couple of minutes can just recenter you. So I think there's some sort of activities that you can do. I also think there's something about actually what is going well. Because when you're fighting the good fight, you can think about the lack of progress, the fact that
Mm.
nothing, and taking some moments out to say, well, what has changed? I remind myself regularly that I am absolutely my ancestors' wildest dreams. My grandmother, who came here from St. Lucia and ended up working in a peanut factory, would be amazed that her daughter's doing this work, her granddaughter's doing this work, written a couple of books, actually being awarded an OBE by the Queen of England. These are amazing things. So yes, there is a lot of work to do, but there is a huge amount of progress too. And I try and actually collate good progress and go and revisit it, particularly on the difficult days. Sort of, okay, remember what you've achieved and remember the difference you've made, even to an individual, as opposed to changing the world, because actually that's how we change the world. We change one attitude at a time. So that's really key. So I'm always looking for those moments that sort of that, oh, that's a change in someone's perspective. Oh, someone's read my book and they've come to me and said it's made a difference. If someone's been able to navigate their workplace better and been promoted, all of these things, I kind of keep a tally, and they re-energize me and they remind me that there's progress, especially when, at the moment, particularly, there's a sort of Elon Musk, DEI must die. There's a pushback in the US around diversity, equity, and inclusion roles. And we don't know how it's going to impact people in the UK, because we often follow suit in many ways. I think it's really important to remember the progress. And also, just for me, when I hear the sort of pushback, sometimes I think, well, at least it's out in the open. I think those
Yeah.
thoughts are always there, but people felt they had to be silent. When someone's out in the open with their perspective, at least then there's something to have a discussion about.
I was going to thank you for bringing that up about the pushback, because I think obviously there's a political influence by politics, even in the UK, and with potentially pushing back on DEI roles. And let's go into a little bit of the complexity around here, because some would argue, because I think it was last year, or that the whole of the Zoom Teams DEI was dismantled, I think. So we've got major organisations taking away, but the argument suggesting we need to do it in a different, some people saying, wow, people work in this space, actually it's not a bad thing, we need to do it this way because this hasn't worked. And so what are your thoughts on people saying that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. I think if you put DEI on the shoulders of one person, that's a mistake. And I think any organization who sort of said, oh, the DEI team hasn't done what they need to do, is misunderstanding it. What DEI teams are doing is trying to embed it in everyone's role. And they're the sort of point of sort of driving it through, but it's not all on their shoulders anyway. So if we're talking about embedding in everyone's role, diversity, equity, and inclusion, if that's the driver, I think that's an absolutely correct driver. But who will drive it if it's not the DEI team? And that's my only concern, that we won't have anyone making it happen. And so it will move away from being on the radar. But what I do know is that leaders who have done a lot of work on themselves, so much work on themselves, people who couldn't say, I'm a white man, who now say, as a white man, I recognize I have a different lived experience, etc. I don't think they are going to revert back, because they've just done so much work and they've made so much progress that I believe they'll keep moving it forward. But I do think that organizations need to ask themselves that question. If we don't have someone driving it, how will it be driven? And I also think that, what I've realized with organizations is they've made huge progress, but they have not measured it well. They've thrown money at things and then not actually stopped to track it over years, because things do take time. They don't happen instantly. And when we meet organizations, we're always talking to them, how are you evaluating this? Who's going to monitor the progress? When we've left you, when we're not working with you anymore, because we can't see who's moved which role. Unfortunately, we don't have that insight into your organization. So my challenge to any organization who says progress hasn't been made is, what have you been measuring and how have you been doing so? And often you'll find they haven't been. And so they really can't say with a hand on their heart that things haven't worked.
Honestly, that's fantastic. I mean, I urge everybody to get your book. I think it's amazing. It's just so a pleasure to read some great work like this, and echoing the kind of things you're saying. So you're also co-founder of Rocking Your Teens, and working with younger people getting into the space of and you talk about things like it develops the entrepreneurial spirit, agility and flexibility, character and self-esteem, and good mental health in young people, or young and teens, as you say. Can I just pull the two things together? Sort of, what do you see? We'll call them Gen Zs or Gen Alphas, or or Gen Zs, whichever way. What do you see a difference with how a younger generation are viewing diversity and equity, particularly in the race equity space?
I think this is an interesting question for me, and it's probably not going to be the best positive response that you're
No.
going to get from me, because what I think is young people have always been quite open. And I think they have always been in a place of let me accept people for who they are generally. I think it's when they hit the workplace that unfortunately the way the workplace works, the sort of paradigm of the workplace, it shifts them because
Mhm.
it's a bigger system than themselves. They're trying to get on and navigate through this workplace, and they conform to a certain degree. And if you don't conform, generally you're out, aren't you? Or you need to find somewhere else to work. So absolutely, the young generation always, they make me hopeful. They work together, they're open, they're interested in each other, they're not trying to put each other in boxes at all. And I find a lot of hope. There, of course, are still barriers. There's barriers in the education system. We know that about the adultification of Black young women and young men. We know about judgments around intelligence and etc. There's a huge amount that still exists. But actually, young people themselves, I think they're taking people as they find them, and they're aiming to be inclusive. Yeah, my concern is when they hit the workplace, what happens, that they feel they can't be the people that they want to be. The environments are not inclusive enough, and they either have to opt out or,
Yeah.
yeah.
And because you do a long run culture change as well, so a young person coming in, perhaps being more open to things, will start having to conform, as you say, and shape the thinking because the culture. So that will take time. I'm going to ask you a final question now, if I can, Jenny. You're a TEDx speaker, which is wonderful. So I want you to just imagine you're now designing your next TEDx talk, which you may already have, your plan, your vision board, if it isn't planned already. So, you're going to be talking about equity, future work, new generations, allyship. Just give me a flavor of what you'd bring in, because you say it's really important to be hopeful. I love what you said about intelligence as well. In your audience, this is me now going into this, your audience are coaches.
Okay. Wow, that's a tough question. Thank you.
No, I thought I'd be tough. Brilliant.
I think that one thing that I've brought into this year that is a message I keep bringing forward, and that I probably would like to share a TED talk about, is slowing down our thinking. Slow thinking. I think that's the message I would give, because I think that will help us in every perspective. When we think fast, we go to our stereotypes, we go to our well-trodden paths, and we make fast judgments. If we slowed our thinking, perhaps we'd have different kinds of conversations. Perhaps we'd be a little bit more open. Perhaps we'd come up with some very different, and perhaps we'd listen more. And I think let's move from acceleration to let's slow our thinking. Everything doesn't have to be. I work with so many organizations who say, yeah, we're working at pace. Why? Why are we working at such a pace? Why are we doing this? Slow thinking. Even in the, I'm no expert in AI, you're the expert in AI, but in this space, I think we require some slow thinking. It's enabling us to think quickly, but do we need some slow thinking? So yeah, for me, that's what I would encourage. How do I slow my thinking down? How do I pause? How do I listen? And I think for coaches, we can create a wonderful space for slow thinking for our clients. I think we can do that really, really well. And I
This is
think that's how we can change the world.
on this is why you're brilliant, and that's an excellent. Are you drawing from Daniel Kahneman's kind of thinking?
Yes, yes.
Who passed away this year, I think, just not long ago. So I think that's a great testament to him and his work, and you're bringing that in, how the brain changes from fast to slow. And I had never thought about it in the DEI space. I had thought about it in the AI space because I'm actually I think I consider myself as a bit of a Luddite now, having been a kind of like, hey, let's go for it. Absolutely slow thinking to think about these unintended consequences, including bias and impact on equity. And you're saying let's slow this down because everyone's rushing for the next quarter and the next year. How would you encourage a leader to slow if you're coaching them? And then, yeah, I'll ask you one because it's really insightful. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a great question. I think, one of the biggest questions is what's making you do this?
Right.
What makes this important to do? I
That's it.
think sometimes we're just doing. And
Mm,
actually, when you actually question yourself, what makes this urgent? What makes this important? What difference is this going to make?
mm,
Just some of those questions will really help the person question, do I have to rush and get this done in the next quarter, for example? Or could we do it
mm,
the quarter after? Or do we even need to do it at all? Yeah, and just that. And also, what is the impact of that? I think it's a really great question. What's the impact of that? Because people don't always think about that. And quite often there are so many far-reaching impacts on colleagues, on clients, on different parts of the business. And it comes out afterwards, and when people are upset and disgruntled and it's caused a problem. So yeah, what's the impact?
Wow, Jenny, that's incredible. And I'm going back, linking that right back to the beginning of the conversation about what we talked about with the effect the people who are most discriminated against is on women of colour, particularly in their older men. And maybe there's something about a group like us, you and I, going into wanting to make this impact because we need to be seen to be perfect, as you said, need to do things. So maybe that going fast, getting things done, trying to please is a key thing that perhaps all of us can learn from. But I wonder in that group as well that if we slow down and maybe we can achieve, in a different way, more, or look at the kind of things that we've achieved already, and have a more balanced approach to life, because discrimination has been here since the beginning of time. We
Exactly.
need to find our way through it and make the change we want to. Jenny, I cannot thank you enough for your insights, your intelligence, your work in this field. I hope you will continue to do more and more, because you really do inspire. You throw these things out and you say, that you put around, that you're very thought-provoking, but also I'd say really on my experience now, it's very gentle with how we approach this field, which I think will encourage more people to be able to be involved as allies and supporters and people with lived experiences and the whole thing. I just want to applaud you for your work, Jenny. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. And I really appreciate meeting you.
Not at all. Thank you.
Powered by Delenta, your all-in-one coaching platform.